All right, Mr. Chair, you want to get us going? Kick us off?
Yeah, welcome everybody. Chuck Bonham, Department of Fish and Wildlife Director. Thanks for joining us here on the Wildlife Conservation Board meeting. Just a couple of kind of overarching rules. I think we've all figured this out by now, but if you're not speaking, go on mute. It'll help the audio. If you do go on camera and you're glitching, turn your video off. That often helps. We all get it if the dog barks in the background or the kid comes running into the screen. That's part of life now. And given the video platform for the last year, what we now do is have John kind of run the whole docket rather than bouncing back between John and I as chair. And when we get to the items of discussion, the public, I think staff will have a system by which they can get in a queue for public comment. We're scheduled until 4 o'clock. Right at the end, we have an executive session, after which we'll come back and report to the public what we discussed in executive session. So I think that's the calendar. We've got some great projects. John's going to run it like a rocket docket, and back to you, John.
Great, thanks. And I'll just quickly go over just for the public and you all, just kind of the meeting logistics, and then we'll do the roll call. So as Chuck mentioned, this is virtual platform. We are using Zoom. And then for those of you who are only on the telephone, there is a telephone capability for the meeting as well. But if you want to follow along with the presentation, you can get the presentation off of our website, and you go to the pull down the presentation from the meetings tab menu, and you can follow along that way as well. And then we will be using the raise hand function. So if you are on Zoom and have the screen, you can see the raise hand function down at the bottom of your screen. If you're on the phone, you'll need to do a couple things. One is *6 to mute and unmute yourself, and then to *9 to raise your hand if you're on the telephone. As far as the meeting format, we'll complete the first 6 items of the agenda, and then we'll go into consent. And then I will read the motion at the end of the consent calendar, and then we'll take a roll call vote for the consent calendar. We'll then move into the presentations. And the way the presentations will work is I will present or introduce the project, and the staff who will present the project. Notice any letters of support and or opposition that we received. And then the staff will provide the presentation to the board members and the public as well. And at the end, I'll ask for board member comments and or questions. And then we'll take those, and then we'll subsequently go into public comment for each item. And the order of the public comment, there's been a couple folks who sent in advanced speaker cards. So we'll take those first, and then I'll ask if there's anybody wishing to make a public comment on those items. And then if you haven't sent in a speaker card, please put your hand up and I'll call on you. And at the very off, I'll just offer one more time for public comment, and you're welcome to speak up. So for the public comment, please make sure that because this meeting is being recorded and the recording serves as minutes to our meeting. So please make sure that you state your name and your affiliation. And similarly to the last several board meetings that we've held virtually, we've had one motion at the end of all the presentation projects. And I would ask the board that we do that again, recognizing that we can take each project individually. If the board wishes to condition the approval or deny the approval, we can take that project independently, and then we can do a roll call vote for that. Otherwise, we'll have one motion at the end of all the presentation projects, and then I'll do a roll call vote then. Lastly, we will be discussing one item in closed session today. And so what that means from the virtual platform world is that board members and a couple of key staff will be exiting the Zoom meeting and going into a separate Teams meeting. And all the board members should have received that Teams meeting notice yesterday with the calendar invite and the link to that Teams platform. Once we conclude our work in the closed session, then we will all come back to the open meeting on Zoom. We will report out of the closed session, the action taken there, and then we'll resume the public meeting on Zoom. And hopefully at that time, we're able to conclude the meeting. So with that, is there any questions from board members on any of the process? Richard?
I just wanted to, my name got entered incorrectly. That's my assistant's name. Yeah, so that's
Okay,
say Richard Gillihan on the screen. So I just wanted to point that out for the record. Thank you.
great, thank
So you're
you.
not Carissa.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, any other questions? All right, we'll go into the roll call and establish a quorum. So Chuck Bonham,
I'm here, John.
Richard Gillian,
Here.
Pete Silva,
Here.
Alina Bokde,
Here.
Fran Pavley,
Here.
Diane Colborn,
Here.
Mary Kreisman,
Here.
and then for Senator Borges, Megan D'Souza. For Senator Stern, Catherine Moore.
Here.
For Senator Skinner, Katrina Robinson. For Assemblymember Garcia, Keith Chelino.
Here.
And for Assemblymember Friedman, Jim Metropolis. Great, we do have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
That's outstanding.
Great, so let's move into the agenda. Item number 2 of the agenda. This is discussion and selection of new board chair and vice chair. If you'll recall, last year, the board kind of set up a process wherein we were going to select a new board chair and a vice chair on the first meeting of each calendar year, just to spread it around a little bit and see if there was any interest in becoming a chair or vice chair. So I'll let the board kind of talk about it. Right now, our chairman, obviously, our board chair is Director Bonham of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And then our vice chair is Alina Bokde, public member selected by the governor. So any discussion on that? And there's a couple options here today. We can continue as is if the board so chooses, with the current chair being Chuck and then the vice chair being Alina. We can select a new chair, we can select a vice chair, but I'll leave it all up to you to figure that out. So Chuck?
Hey, John, if the board members would indulge me, I'd love a chance to just frame this up real quick and give my perspective. So if you go back and take a look at the history of the board, it, for the majority of time, was a 3-person board comprised of the director of the department, the director of the Department of Finance, and the president of the Fish and Game Commission. And in that function, but of course it had some challenges, and a result more recently in history was, I think personally, an appropriate expansion of the board and to include publicly appointed members. Of course, this whole time we've had advisory members, leaders in the legislature, but non-voting. So here we are today, and I can kind of give on one hand and on the other my view. On one hand, I think it makes sense that the chair had a connection to the department director. The reality is that the WCB infrastructure is within the department. You know, our administrative services are their administrative services, same for technology. And there's been this great glove in hand relationship between the two since the board was created in 1947. And a lot of the symmetry and work that appears on the agendas like today is because of that close coordination. John and I see each other pretty regularly. Over the course of a business day, we're available to each other. So it kind of really makes sense in that way, I think. But on the other hand, at least for me personally, it seems kind of not 21st century, not transparent, that it's just automatically assumed a chair will be with a certain position or person in perpetuity. It doesn't seem very open to just keep rolling it through year after year. That's an evolution Pete and I experienced at the Fish and Game Commission. It used to just pass it along, and now it votes each year. So I like the idea that the board would discuss what to do. I think it's the right approach for the public as well. So I there's a pro and a con. I'm willing to keep doing it. So I'm also willing to go with the will of the board. So those are my 2 cents on this item. I'd be glad to take any questions as we debate it.
Thank you, Chuck. Any other board member comments?
Hi, this is Alina, and to the board, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with your comments, Chuck, in terms of the clear benefit and value of the close coordination and that day-to-day work that happens with the board, the WCB and Fish and Wildlife. So it's and I don't think we can kind of overstate the importance of that. I also agree with you that I think if there is, and you've done a tremendous job as our chair, and appreciate your willingness to continue in that role. But I think if the board also supports a different chair and there is someone who is interested, I'm personally I'm open to that, because I do think it's a healthy practice within the board to have this opportunity on an annual basis to kind of lead the work of the board during that tenure. So I also in terms of it, both addressing the strategic plan and but continuing to work closely. So I just personally, I may have the interest and desire, but I do not have the time nor the capacity, given just my current obligations. And so I'm happy if it at the pleasure of the board to stay in the vice chair position, but we'll support, obviously, if there is anyone else from the board who would like to be considered for board chair, to hear that from the board. But I, also support, Chuck, your and thank you for your willingness to kind of continue in this position. So.
Thank you, Elena. Is there any other board comments? All right, hearing or seeing none, I guess we'll keep status quo if the board is okay with that. And we won't bring this back until February again of next year. Perfect.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Great.
Well, John, just let me make sure. Senator Pavley, Diane, Mary, do y'all hotly object to Elena and I continuing, or that's cool with everybody?
It's fine.
Go
I
ahead.
think we can evaluate it in another year. I think it's because we're in that transition from a
Okay.
sort of a agency specific and finance department administrative position, and now you've widened it up. And I look at the growth over the time, like for the State Water Board and some of those that started very small. But you're right, it takes a lot of time and coordination, and most of the rest of us have other jobs and can't be in Sacramento to be engaged on that kind of depth. So there's value to that. But I've seen other agencies over time transition to that more public view or face on it as far as board meetings. But certainly was very much respectful of all the work that has to go on the day-to-day level behind the scenes. So I'm supported. I thank both of you for your willingness to continue to serve in your capacities and for the graciousness of your comments.
And I too, this is Diane, I'm fine with continuing the status quo till revisit this again next year.
Great, thank you. Mary, any comments? Or Richard?
I would just say that I concur with that direction as well.
Great.
Yes, I agree. I support that. Chuck does a great job in that role, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
Great, thank you. All right, with that, congratulations, Chuck and Alina. So we'll move on to item number 3 in the agenda. Or what? Actually, yeah, item number
John,
3. Yes.
I won't let it go to my head.
All right, thank you. You know, I don't know if I need to ask for public comment on that item because I don't think I do, but you know, if there's anybody in the public wishing to make a comment on that, please raise your hand. All right, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 3. This is an item in a running standing item in our agenda to allow an opportunity for the public to make comments to the board for items that are not in the agenda. So please make sure that your comments, if you wish to make comments during this period, that it's not related to a project that's currently on the docket. So I have not received any speaker cards for this item. And I see no hands raised. So if anybody is on the phone and is having trouble, just speak up. All right, seeing none. We'll close that item and go into item number 4. This is the funding status item that's always in our agenda as well. This provides a high overview of the funding that's available to the Wildlife Conservation Board through a number of sources, through the Wildlife Restoration Fund, through bond funding. We do have some general fund monies in there. We have greenhouse gas reduction funding. And this provides a current snapshot of our funding at this particular time with totals that we started with at the beginning of the year. And then we've aligned projects that are on this board meeting agenda. And then we've accounted for projects that are currently under development. And then we have a projected unallocated balance at the end of each funding fund source. And we roll that all up in a total of all funds. So the grand total for at the start of this particular board meeting, we had 264.9 million. We have almost $100 million worth of projects currently being worked on and in development by staff at the board. And then we have a projected unallocated balance of about a little over 148 million. I'll be happy to answer any questions on any of those fund sources if you'd like.
I had a question, John.
Sure.
Since I'm not in Sacramento any longer. What you know about whether the cap and trade funds will be continuing on in the future, or is that potentially in flux?
As of right now, the greenhouse funding that we received, at the beginning, we had a $20 million allocation. And the way those funds were allocated was 60% of that funding was to go towards conservation easements on the ground, and then not less than 60% would go towards conservation easements. The remainder was 40% for restoration and enhancement development of infrastructure for greenhouse gas and reduction. As of now, there is no proposal for any additional new GGRF funding at WCB at this particular time. I am going to be talking about some new funding that's currently came out last week in the governor's May revise during the director's report.
Oh, good.
But that is not GGRF funding.
Right. Yeah, GGRF, it sounds like that expenditure item for you makes sense because that will go up and down with the volatility of
Yeah,
the GGRF funds, and it's not an ongoing expenditure that's needed. But I know there's some discussions for a variety of sources of what may happen to that fund in general.
right.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions from board members? All right, any members of the public wishing to speak on that item? Seeing none, hearing none, we'll move on to item number 5. This is the executive director's report, and I have a couple items to point out. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, that the governor's May revise included for WCB $230 million over 2 years for wildlife corridor and fish passage projects, particularly under the water resiliency package that the governor put forward, among other proposals that went forward in the May revise. What that means for WCB, it's planned that we would receive $65 million in budget year 21-22, and then the balance of that, over $165 million in budget year 22-23. This would be a great shot in the arm for WCB from a wildlife corridor and fish passage standpoint. We are getting ready to post and send out our last solicitation under Prop 68 funding for wildlife corridor and fish passage. And the balance of that funding right now is $7 million. So this would be a really big shot in the arm for that. Recognizing that it still needs to work its way through the legislative process, as well as a final and approved budget that the governor signs and begins July 1st. So we're hoping that that'll make it through. We're optimistic that it's going to make it through. And I did attend both Senate and Assembly budget hearings earlier this week, and the Senate has another budget hearing next Tuesday to discuss these items more in depth. Whether or not this item will come up for questions by members of the legislature or the budget subcommittees, I will be prepared to answer those questions if they do come up. The next is, I think board members received yesterday our release of our 2020 year in review, highlighting WCB's work over the past year, and details that's included in the year in review was presented in depth to the board last November. We basically went over everything that we completed last year during the November meeting and highlighted where we've achieved or overachieved in many cases some of the strategic plan goals and objectives. Overall, you funded 143 projects in 2020 and allocated just under about $138 million supporting California's wildlife, natural landscapes, and outdoor wildlife oriented recreation. So that's a testament to you all that we did a great job last year. And I just want to thank you for your support working through 2020 of last year. Next, I just want to highlight that our public access consultation period is open right now. It's currently open and will close May 27th. And for those in the public or board members on here and know of folks who are interested in our public access program or would like us to reach out to organizations that you think would benefit from our public access program, I would encourage you to go on our website or just reach out to WCB staff. And then also following the closure of the solicitation next Friday, the following week we'll be holding a webinar, a public open webinar on June 2nd to present the PSN, and then also help that we're hoping to answer questions and provide applicants guidance on how to be a complete and submit a more competitive application. So I hope people will take advantage of that. Remember, it's on June 2nd. I think it starts at either 10 or 10:30, 10 o'clock. So be looking for that. We will post that notice again on our website. And, you know, just reach out to your constituents, your groups that you work with daily or weekly or whatever, and or you know that has an interest in that item, the public access, and we're happy to talk to them. Next thing, staff continues to telework. As you know, we all went down basically overnight on a telework arrangement a year ago, last March. I think WCB staff generally has been doing a great job. We kind of just, you know, accepted it and worked with it. And, you know, staff is doing really well right now. I think everybody's enjoying some form of teleworking at some capacity. We do have some limited staff that comes in quite often to the office. But for the most part, the majority of WCB staff is continuing to telework from home. In addition, our travel was really restricted last March as well. And as COVID begins to open, or not COVID, but as the state continues to make progress in opening up on the COVID front, we'll be able to, we anticipate getting out more and having more opportunity to meet with our partners, our constituents, and folks and our grantees out on the ground. So we're really looking forward to that. WCB will be moving into the new California Natural Resources Building in the fall of this year. If you've had an opportunity to be downtown Sacramento, you will have no doubt noticed the new building, the new Natural Resources Building. We'll be on the, right now we're scheduled to be on the 17th floor, which we're sharing part of the floor with the executive staff of the Department of Fish and Wildlife and Legal Office. So Chuck will be on the floor as well. And staff had an opportunity to take a tour of the building last week. And it's a really beautiful building, and we're really looking forward into moving into that. One thing we did have to do was cut down on the number of staff or offices that are provided for staff, because we anticipate continuing to telework even when the state opens up. And we're working on you know, how we're going to roll that out from a whole staff perspective over the next month. We're awaiting guidance from Cal HR and the California Natural Resources Agency to help us devise a plan for a telework plan for WCB. So that's all I have to report out. I'll be happy to answer any questions on any of those items, or if any board members has any comments, be happy to answer them. And just real quick on the year-end review, the public, I think the board members received it yesterday, and the public can expect to access it from our website later today. So it should be up and posted to our website later today. And please provide any feedback to us on that. We're proud of the work we did in 2020, and I hope you guys are too. And so please, we welcome any feedback that you have. So with that, I'll leave it open for questions, or if anybody has any questions.
Hi, John, it's Selena. So thank you for this. I'm looking forward to reading the report, and yeah, a lot to celebrate during unprecedented times. And you know, I feel like the work from the Wildlife Conservation Board, I mean, just didn't, you know, miss a beat. You kept working, the staff kept working to really get out, you know, funding to support some extraordinary projects and kept things moving. So many kudos to you and the staff during, again, a very difficult, you know, pandemic that we're still working to kind of come out of. But I would like to hear maybe at the next board meeting, just an update on where both the work internally that I understand is happening around developing, you know, a either race or equity plan for the board, and diversity and inclusion work for the board. I know there's training and you know, and committee work that's happening. So I'd love to just kind of hear where things are internally, but also, you know, what's some of the thinking as we look, you know, forward. How are we going to be working, you know, using some of the underlying principles around diversity, inclusion, and justice and race to really think about the grant making side of the work of the board. And so just, you know, I just want to put that out there just kind of as a placeholder to kind of understand some of the work that's happening within the board around this, I think internally with the staff, but also wanting to work with the board as we look towards the updates of the strategic plan, the thinking for how we're using, you know, these principles and the work of equity to really advance, you know, also some of the programs and grant making work for the board as well. So interested in kind of just participating in any of those conversations as they develop. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. I know, unfortunately, I wasn't able to make, I think, the last two board meetings that I think there might have been an update. So don't want to take necessarily any time in this meeting, but do want to kind of ask as appropriate, would like to kind of keep updated on that work, and also, you know, with the board have maybe sometime in the new year, a bigger conversation around kind of equity and inclusion, you know, goals related to grant making as well.
Okay, be happy to. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mhm. All right, any other board member comments?
Jen, one, based on the vice chair's comments. And for what it's worth, I can't tell if my video is on or not. I think it is. Okay. So Elena, I think first, thank you for that. And I think would be a great agenda item, but a super awesome thing for the Wildlife Conservation Board is within our department's existing justice, equity, diversity, inclusion team and effort, we have a cohort of folks who've really stepped forward to volunteer and lead that. And Rebecca Friss, who is kind of your deputy at the Wildlife Conservation Board, is one of those leaders that's volunteered. So you've got an asset in the WCB who's also one of the leaders in the department's broader effort on this. So I think that'll be both a great request and an opportunity for Rebecca to walk us through what's going on. Not to put Rebecca on the spot for the next meeting, but I think that would be great.
Yeah, agree. Thanks,
Great.
Jack.
Thank you.
All right, any other comments? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 6. This is the recovery of funds. And what this is a capture of closed projects where we're bringing funds back into the board. So the board has approved these projects. You allocated the amounts that's shown in the chart. And then there was some residual funding left over based on the amounts that we spent. And then the balance that's remaining, we bring those back into the funds from which they came, and then we'll reallocate them for new projects. Is there any questions on this item? Any public comment? Okay, seeing none. That takes us into our consent calendar for today. The consent calendar includes items 7 through 30. And I just want to point out for the board that items 8, 14, and 21 we've withdrawn from consideration at this time. So I'm asking you not to consider those today. We will be bringing those back at a later time. So it would be items 7 through 30, excluding 8, 14, and 21. Is there any board member comments or questions on any of the consent items? Does anyone want one of those
Oh, any of them?
on any of them? Yeah.
I had a question just on one for a point of clarification because I wasn't familiar with the term. It related to the California Climate Investment Fund. I think that was in relation to item 10. I just hadn't heard of it. Is that a different terminology
I believe.
for greenhouse gas? I just didn't know that.
Yeah,
fund.
this is Rebecca Friss. I can just chime in and let you know that that is kind of the new name of the program. GGRF funding is basically the Climate Investment Fund. That's kind of the newer terminology for that.
I guessed that, but I had
Yeah.
never read that before.
Yep.
Okay. That,
I still default back to saying GGRF, but now people say CCI.
yes, well, I was familiar with the GGRF, so this is good to know. All right, thank you. That was just for clarification.
And this CCI funding is from CAL FIRE. Actually, they're providing the funding for this project.
All right, any other questions? And then just to let the board know, we received several letters of support, and instead of reading all those in the record, this is just to let you know that we will attach these as part of the record of today's meeting, the support letters that we received. And also just to point out, we did not receive any letters of opposition for this, for any project on the consent calendar today. So seeing no board member comments or questions, anybody in the public wishing to speak? No hands are raised. I see nobody on the phone wishing to speak. All right, so if I could ask for a motion.
This is Diane. I'll move that we adopt the consent calendar.
Second?
Great, thank you. All right, so let me read the motion into the record, and then we'll take a roll call vote. So staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation adopt the written findings as appropriate and approve all individual projects identified by staff as suitable for funding up to the amounts listed for each, and listed as consent calendar items 7 through 30, excluding agenda items 8, 14, and 21, as identified in the Wildlife Conservation Board final meeting agenda dated May 20th, 2021. Authorize staff to enter into appropriate agreements necessary to accomplish these projects, and authorize staff in the Department of Fish and Wildlife to proceed substantially as planned. So with that, Member Boakday,
Approve.
Member Bonham,
Yes.
Member Colborn,
Yes.
Member Kreisman,
Yes,
Member Gillian,
Yes.
Member Pavley,
Yes.
Member Silva.
Yes.
Great, passed unanimously. Thank you, board members. Okay, that takes us to item 31. This is the first item on our presentation calendar. Get there. So this is to consider a grant to Save the Redwoods League for Forest Redwoods Rising Project up on the north coast in the Redwood Country. Judah Grossman on our staff will present the project today. Judah?
Very good. Thank you, John, and members of the board. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to Save the Redwoods League for a cooperative project with the California Department of Parks and Recreation and the National Park Service to restore mixed conifer forest and coastal redwood habitat over 1,000 acres in Redwood National and State Parks situated in Humboldt and Del Norte counties. This location map shows the project area in red, which is comprised of 2 work areas. The topmost inset map on the left shows the greater Mill Creek work site, which is 6 miles east of Crescent City in Del Norte County. The second inset map on the left shows the greater Prairie Creek work site, which is 4 miles north of Oric in Humboldt County. The California-Oregon border is off map, but it's less than 17 miles north of the northernmost work site. Next slide, please. California's North Coast forests were intensively harvested since the early 20th century, and clear-cutting old-growth redwood forests was common practice. That also entailed a network of access roads and skid trails that further degraded habitat. These photographs show denuded hillsides and road scars following clear-cut activities. Next slide, please. The photograph here on the right is an aerial view of a network of access roads and skid trails cut into a logging site. These activities and their subsequent effects directly impact the streams, rivers, and native fisheries in these watersheds, which have to contend with degraded water quality, debris jams, and failing culverts and stream crossings. Next slide. Today, those North Coast forests are largely comprised of second growth redwoods and Douglas fir, spruce, and alder trees that were seeded at extremely high densities in anticipation of future logging activities. As a result, those forests are now hugely overcrowded, forcing trees to compete with each other for limited canopy space and grow in dense, fire-prone stands. The background in this photograph shows tall, widely spaced old-growth redwoods, which contrast against much smaller, closely spaced trees in the foreground that were seeded following past logging activities. Next slide, please. In 2018, Save the Redwoods League, California State Parks, and the National Park Service launched the Redwoods Rising Initiative to rehabilitate over 70,000 acres of forest habitat on public lands in Redwood National and State Parks. The grant being considered today is a significant contribution to that larger initiative. Specific restoration actions to be funded under this grant would include selective thinning, road removal, and stream enhancement. The photograph shown here on the left shows heavy equipment armoring a stream bank, and the photograph on the right shows mechanical thinning. Next slide, please. In this slide, we see the photograph on the left offering another view of the mechanical thinning process, and the photograph on the right showing the forest after thinning activities are complete. Next slide. The photographs in this next slide, there might be a delay on my end. Oh, there we go. The photographs in this next slide show road removal underway on the right and a completed road removal site on the left. Next slide. Staff recommends the project as proposed, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the board might have. And on the call today, we also have Richard Campbell, Director of Restoration with Save the Redwoods League, and Stephanie Davidson, Grants Program Manager with Save the Redwoods League. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Judah. And just for the record, I did receive a letter of support for this project from Congressman Jared Huffman, Senator Mike McGuire, Stephen Metz, Superintendent of Redwoods National and State Parks, Victor Bolejicek, District Superintendent of the North Coast Redwoods District. So is there any board member comments or questions on this project?
I had a question, please, if I may.
Yeah.
And this is maybe not just applying to this project, but just in general. Is the practice still going on that after an area is significantly cut or burned, that an overdense population of trees is planted that's perhaps harmful to wildlife, water supply and water quality, and the growth of the trees?
You know what? That's a fantastic question. I prefer to defer that to Richard Campbell, who's expert in this field and most familiar with current practices. Richard, if you're on the call and able to raise your hand electronically, John can unmute you and you could respond to Senator Pavley's comment.
Hello, can you hear me? I can't tell if I'm unmuted.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
Thank you, Richard.
Great. So first of all, Judith, thank you for the great presentation, and thanks to the board for consideration of this project. Senator Pavley, I think it's important to remember that the logging practices that occurred that preceded the establishment of what is now Redwood National State Parks were before the modern forest practice rules, and post-harvest practices have evolved a lot since then. So the sort of stuff that Judith mentioned, the aerial seeding, that doesn't occur so much anymore.
I was aware of that in your beautiful park. In fact, my family is all up at Jedediah Smith right now while I'm at home on the WCB.
Oh no.
Living the life. But I thought just in general practices on US Forest Service lands and other parts of the state, is that a similar problem we've encountered? Past practices maybe. There's quite a few items on the agenda, whether it's encroachment into meadows or whatever else, that the natural practice was to just overpopulate, I suppose, hoping that some of the trees would make it, but if they're all moving ahead, then all of them are stunted in growth and it affects the ecosystem. So I just wondered if that practice had been stopped on a federal level in general in California.
I can offer a small comment on some of our post-fire recovery projects that we help fund. There's a real trade-off in the reforestation, the density of those plantings, versus thinning at a later date, because you do want to achieve a target density so the trees aren't overly competing with themselves and you don't have overly dense forests. I think some of the trade-off is it's not always clear what percentage or what fraction of those planted trees will actually successfully recruit. So it's a little bit, sometimes a bit of art and science, deciding the density to plant versus the amount to thin at a later date. So I think to Richard's point, and as you know, those practices have evolved quite a bit, and it's still a biological system. So it takes that hands-on adaptive management thought too.
Yeah, I know we've progressed in many ways. Final question on measuring or quantifying benefits of carbon sequestration. How do you do that? What protocols are you using, or who measures and calculates that? Because it'll become relevant.
Yeah,
a lot of discussions in the near future.
Yeah, that's another great question. There are protocols for estimating carbon sequestration in these systems. This is not funded by CCI or GGRF, so we aren't making a requirement to monitor and report on that directly as part of the grant. But Richard might know of other monitoring or estimations that are part of this work.
I didn't know if there was a voluntary registry with protocols available where you could participate in that, because obviously if you have a way to measure them, that may be helpful to you in the future, let alone the planet.
Yeah. Richard, are there any notes you'd share about those carbon sequestration estimates on this work in particular?
Sure. So I will note that Redwoods Rising has also been the recipient of a CCI grant through CAL FIRE. And so in service of that, we have developed carbon calculations for both our road removal activities, which are essentially reforestation, as those old road beds are allowed to repopulate with trees, as well as through the forest thinning work, in the long-term gains that we see from converting an extremely dense stand of trees that aren't growing fast and are likely to die early to a stand of trees that are going to be much more long-lived, and where that carbon storage is going to be much more stable. Specific to the quantifications, the numbers are really stand specific, but I will say that on average, we're seeing, less than 20 or 10% even of carbon storage in the young forest relative to the sort of the adjacent reference conditions in the old growth in places like Jedediah Smith and Prairie Creek.
All right, thank you. We'll be looking at the 5-year scoping plan for SB 32 next year and how to reach 40% reduction goals of greenhouse gas emissions. And I think natural and working lands are going to play a more important part in reaching our targeted objectives. So quantifying the benefits of good forest management, I think would be extremely helpful to you in the future, perhaps in grants and things, and recognition of the important role that forest plays in climate change.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah.
And we are doing that through inventory data collection and modeling, some of it specifically in service of the grant. Other functions are in terms of informing our adaptive management practices so that we can adjust our silviculture and our techniques over time.
Great, thank you.
All right, is there any other board member questions? See no hands raised. I have no speaker cards for this particular item. Is there any member of the public wishing to speak? Great, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 32. So this is to consider a grant to the California Deer Association for a cooperative project with the Forest Service to enhance forest health on the Shasta Trinity National Forest. Judah will also present the project. Judah.
Great. Get it too first. Thanks, John. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to the California Deer Association for a cooperative project with the U.S. Forest Service to enhance forest health, meadow function, and reduce hazardous fuels through selective thinning and reforestation activities on approximately 1,290 acres in Shasta Trinity National Forest, 23 miles east of McLeod in Siskiyou County. This location map shows the project area in red, and you can see the label for the town of McLeod on the left-hand side of the screen. The project envelope shown here is roughly 13,000 acres, and the work to be completed under this grant would comprise a 1,290 acre subset of that larger area. Next slide, please. A host of contributing factors like fire suppression, climate change, and drought-related impacts have degraded forest and meadow habitat across much of California's upper watershed lands, including Shasta Trinity National Forest. The two photographs shown here illustrate conifer encroachment into meadow habitat on the left and oak woodland habitat on the right. Next slide, please. In addition, power line corridors passing through this landscape have reduced the structural and vegetative complexity of the plant communities in those footprints. As a result, wildlife like elk and their young are markedly vulnerable to predation in those areas. Next slide. The proposed project would entail selective thinning and vegetation removal to enhance meadow habitat, migratory corridors, aspen stands, and black oak woodland. Staff recommends the project as proposed. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions that the board might have. And on the call today, we also have Dale McDougall with the State Wildlife Project Director with the California Deer Association, and Jake Barlow, State Project Director with the California Deer Association. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Judah. Right, any board member questions? Seeing none, hearing none. Any members of the public wishing to speak on this project? Seeing none, hearing none. Okay, I have not received any letters of support for this project, so we'll move on to item number 33 on the agenda. Thank you, Judah. So this is to consider a grant to the Pacific Forest Trust to acquire a conservation easement over a little over 2,000 acres of land on private property up in Shasta County. Joe Navari on our staff will present the project to the board this morning. Joe, well, not this morning, but this afternoon. Joe.
Thank you, John. It's my pleasure to present to you today the Lightning Canyon Ranch Conservation Easement Project. The Lightning Canyon Ranch is located between the Sacramento River and McLeod River arms of Shasta Lake, as you can see on the map here. It's approximately 3 miles southeast of Lakehead, California in Shasta County. The ranch is accessed from I-5 off of Gilman Road and has multiple access points from rural residential neighborhoods on the western and northeastern sides of the ranch. The ranch is 2,098 acres and contains 25 contiguous parcels. The ranch is surrounded by a mix of federally owned lands and privately owned lands. The ranch is entirely forested and ranges in elevation from 1,200 feet to a maximum of 3,281 feet on top of Sacramento Mountain. During the 1980s and 90s, much of the area experienced subdivision and rural residential development into single-family homes on large tracts of 5 to 15 acres. Next slide, please. Historically, the ranch has been used for rural residential investment speculation, timber production, and recreation. Currently, the landowners utilize the property for timber production and recreational uses, including hunting, hiking, fishing, and swimming. The property has limited improvements consisting of a single 1,700 square foot home, a garage, associated water well, and some graveled interior ranch roads. Next slide, please. The Hickson family has successfully purchased many of the neighboring properties and amassed many of the smaller parcels that were originally subdivided as rural residential lots. In addition to the rural residential lots bordering the ranch also borders a large swath of National Forest Service land. The protection of the ranch will allow for connectivity between the previously subdivided rural residential development plots and the larger National Forest Service lands. The Lightning Canyon Ranch conservation easement will further prevent future carbon invasive low density development that has occurred in the area. And in addition, the project will provide options for wildlife adaptation, reduced fire risk, and carbon storage in the form of reductions to timber harvest. The water resources on the ranch are rich and provide Lake Shasta with cold, clean water. Salt Creek and Long Tom Creek both provide high quality riparian habitat, including mineral spring and 2 waterfalls like the one here to the ranch. The prevention of future subdivision and the reductions to future timber harvest outlined in the conservation easement and associated baseline documentation report support the goals of the Wildlife Conservation Board's climate adaptation and resiliency program very well. Next slide, please. The property will be managed by the landowners, and the conservation easement will be deeded to and monitored by the Pacific Forest Trust. The landowners will be providing an endowment for annual monitoring. Next slide, please. The Department of General Services has approved the fair market value of $1,060,000, of which WCB is proposing to fund $795,000. The Hickson family is generously providing a bargain sale donation in the amount of $260,000 in addition to the monitoring endowment. The ranch is home to many special status species, including this trail camera picture of a Pacific fisher that was recently taken on the ranch. In the audience today are Robert Hickson, the landowner, and Connie Vest, the co-founder of the Pacific Forest Trust. And at this time, we'd welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you, Joe.
Welcome.
Any board member questions, comments?
I just had one question. This is Diane.
Yeah, Diane.
So the property owner is going to continue to manage it for timber harvest, and I think the report said that there would be a timber harvest management plan developed. And I was just wondering, does the agreement, the conservation easement, say anything specific about the level of timber harvesting that would occur, or sustainable management, and what's the process for that?
Sure. The conservation easement and the baseline documentation report basically identify areas within the ranch that have special management needs. They can be areas for timber management that basically have certain biological resources that they want to protect within those management areas. And they also have special management zones along the creeks where logging would not be allowed and that sort of thing. So they call them special management zones in the conservation easement and in the baseline documentation report. Does that answer your question? And maybe Connie could also
Sure, go
help
ahead.
us out as well.
Yeah, Connie, are you available and on?
Yes, yeah, I'd be happy to chime in a little bit here. So the conservation easement is protecting a really diverse property. And so of the 2,100 acres, there's about 800 acres that has productive conifer forests that could be managed for commercial timber. It's relatively young, like so many rural recreational subdivisions. The original developer kind of went in and took all the good stuff before breaking up the property. So in many respects, the property is sort of on a restoration trajectory. But having said that, the easement does restrict timber harvest across the property, but in particular in these 800 acres. But we don't want to remove the opportunity to harvest timber, because with climate change, it's more and more important to be able to manage for fuel risk, and habitat enhancement. So there are specific restrictions on the timber harvest without removing it as a conservation tool. And also, it does help support the ongoing costs of the property, but it's not a big, commercial sort of property to begin with.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Connie. All right, any other questions? All right, seeing none, no hands raised. Any members of the public wishing to make a public comment? I do have 2 speaker cards. Connie already spoke, and Bob Hickson, the landowner. Would you like to say a word or two? Hearing none.
No, I know.
Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Sorry
please.
about that. Good afternoon. My name is Bob Hickson. My wife Cassie and I own Lightning Canyon. We fell in love with Northern California and Lightning Canyon and all the springs and the creeks and the topography. I'd like to thank Joe Navari and Mr. Donnelly and Chairman Bonham and the rest of the board for consideration for Lightning Canyon. We've tried real hard to reverse decades of land fragmentation, and we would love for the board to help us make that permanent. As I mentioned, there's lots of springs, cold water springs, creeks, waterfalls, and all that water feeds, of course, into California's largest reservoir, Lake Shasta. Back several years ago, during the worst part of the drought, I was just amazed that many of these springs kept flowing, and I don't know where the water came from, but during the worst part of the drought, the springs were still flowing. Not to get way off a subject, but the Wintu tribe, Sacramento Mountain is on the property, and the Wintu tribe named that mountain, I'm going to mess up the pronunciation, Yohala Mi, and the name of that is Frog Mountain. And I've got to consider that Frog Mountain was because of all the springs. But anyway, it's a great source of water. And also between the McLeod and the Sacramento arms of Lake Shasta, Lightning Canyon provides a large east-west corridor for wildlife, a land bridge for wildlife. And so I really appreciate the board's consideration and opportunity to make Lightning Canyon a preserve and conserve the water and the wildlife. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to item number, thank you, Joe. Move on to item number 34, the Mountain Meadows project. This is to consider an allocation of a grant to the Trust for Public Land for a cooperative project with Sierra Nevada Conservancy and the Feather River Land Trust. Kurt Weber on our staff will present you the project.
Thanks, John. Mountain Meadows, it's known locally as Home Ranch, consists of 8 parcels totaling around 2,476 acres near the town of Westwood in Lassen County at an elevation of around 5,000 feet. This lies along the Lassen Volcanic Scenic Byway. Next slide. The Home Ranch property contains a significant portion of the 42 square mile Mountain Meadow watershed, namely Goodrich Creek, a tributary to the Feather River and ultimately Lake Oroville, which represents about 8% of California's reservoir capacity. Home Ranch was a successful candidate in WCB's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund program, and the property was previously identified as a high priority for conservation in the CDFW Mountain Meadows Watershed Conceptual Area Protection Plan. The Mountain Meadows CAP noted that this is one of the largest remaining examples of montane meadow in the state. Next slide. And the CAP states that due to the large size of the meadow complex and the relatively undisturbed condition of the upper watershed, the lack of development in and around the meadow, the potential for large-scale habitat restoration is exceptional. Next slide. The entirety of the Mountain Meadow watershed area serves as a major movement corridor for species such as pine marten, black bear, northern goshawk, mountain lion, and the Doyle deer herd. It's also an important fawning area for the Doyle deer herd. It also serves as a protected area for the federally listed gray wolf. A Home Ranch includes 1/3 of this 5,200 acre meadow. It's the second largest montane meadow in the Sierra and the largest montane meadow in the North Fork of the Feather River watershed. Next slide. An existing easement nearby is held by the Feather River Land Trust and already protects 840 meadow acres. These montane meadows are particularly important habitat for birds and amphibians. During the summer months, they are considered the single most important habitat type in the Sierra Nevada for resident and migrating birds. The Home Ranch easement will be held by the Feather River Land Trust as a successor grantee from the Trust for Public Land. The landowner, Sierra Pacific Land and Timber Company, has already made significant investments towards improving the ecological health of the property. The easement will ensure that these improvements remain. Staff recommends approval of the project as proposed. On the call with us today is Markley Bavinger from the Trust for Public Land and Shelton Douthit from the Feather River Land Trust. Are there any questions?
Great, thank you, Kurt. Any board member questions? All right, seeing none, hearing none. Any members of the public wishing to speak? I see one hand raised. Celeste, can you tell me who the hand is, please? Oh, Markley.
Yes, hi, this is Markley Bavinger from the Trust for Public Land. I'm the Sierra Program Manager. And just wanted to thank the board for its consideration and the commitment of both CDFW and WCB for staff time and the vision to date. This project has really been remarkable in its evolution, and just want to point out that it's also in support of maintaining the economic utility of this landscape, both through forestry and grazing, while also balancing the stressors of those land use types on the ecological needs of the property, both for water, habitat, and overall landscape connectivity. We're very excited about this project and hope that it can serve as a model for how Sierra Meadows can achieve habitat objectives and remain working landscapes, and be climate responsive using the tools of conservation easement. to that end. So thank you very much.
Good, thank you, Markley. Any other members of the public wishing to speak? All right, seeing none. One last time for board member comments or questions. All right, let's move on to item number 35. This is the Robbers Creek Watershed Restoration Project in Lassen and Plumas counties. This is to consider a grant to Sierra Institute for Community and Environment with the Forest Service and Point Blue Conservation Science. Judah will present the board the project. Judah.
Great. Thank you, John and members of the board. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to the Sierra Institute for Community and Environment for a cooperative project with the U.S. Forest Service and Point Blue Conservation Science to enhance forest health, restore meadow function, and reduce hazardous fuels through selective thinning and reforestation activities on 1,636 acres in Lassen National Forest, approximately 2.5 miles north of Westwood in Lassen County. This location map shows the project area in red. The majority of the project area is located within Lassen County, though a small portion near the center is also located in Plumas County. You can see the project area relative to Lake Almanor to the southwest as well. Next slide, please. Changed environmental conditions like climate change, as well as land management practices like fire suppression, have greatly affected forest structure, wildlife habitat quality, and hydrologic function in meadows. For example, studies by Lassen National Forest indicate that prior to settlement, time between wildland fires in this area was typically 11 years. Today, almost 90% of the project area has a fire return interval of 111 years. Again, that's 11 years between fires pre-settlement versus 111 years between fires today. As a result, plant communities have shifted to more shade-tolerant species and dense vegetation with an accumulation of fire fuels. This photograph shows conifers that have severely encroached upon a meadow stream in the Robbers Creek watershed. Next slide, please. This next photograph shows the cut bank on a meadow stream in Robbers Creek watershed, evidence of the meadow's degraded hydrologic condition. Next slide, please. The proposed project includes restoring meadow hydrology and selectively thinning encroaching conifers from meadow, aspen, and upland forest habitat. Next slide, please. The project actions will improve forest composition, reduce hazardous fire fuels, and increase habitat resiliency in the face of climate change, wildfire, and drought. Next slide. Staff recommends the project as proposed. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions that the board might have. And on the call today, we also have Kyle Rogers, Collaborative Forestry Program Manager with the Sierra Institute for Community and Environment.
Thank you, Judah. So before board member questions, I just do want to let folks know that I did receive letters of support from Alicia Wilson, the coordinator of the MIDO Summit Consortium, Nils Lunder, the director of Mountain Meadows Conservancy, Neil Fisher, and Jim Richard, Ryan Burnett of the South Lassen Watershed Restoration Group. So any board member questions at this time, comments for that? All right, seeing none. Any members of the public wishing to speak? Seeing none, great. All right, moving on to item number 35. Or 36, I'm sorry. This is the Grizzly Island Wildlife Area Pond 12 and Field 13 Enhancement Project in Solano County. This is to consider an allocation for a grant to the California Waterfowl Association for a cooperative project with the Department of Fish and Wildlife to restore habitat and upland habitat at the Grizzly Island Wildlife Area. James Croft on our staff will present the project. James.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to California Waterfowl Association for a cooperative project with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to complete wetland and upland enhancements at the Grizzly Island Wildlife Area in Solano County. Grizzly Island Wildlife Area lies in the heart of the Sassoon Marsh on Grizzly Island and is owned and operated by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. The wildlife area has been managed for wildlife habitat since CDFW acquired the land in 1931. Next slide, please. Grizzly Island Wildlife Area is a complex of managed brackish seasonal wetlands, sloughs, and uplands. Much of the wildlife area still retains its natural topography, while some areas have been leveled and graded for agricultural production. In the 1990s, Grizzly Island Wildlife Area had the highest documented nest densities of dabbling ducks anywhere in North America. Since then, it has experienced a long-term decline, with habitat fragmentation and habitat quality being significant drivers of the decline. In October of 2019, Field 13, which is an upland field, and the perimeter of Pond 12 was intensively burned by a wildfire, and most perennial grasses and annual grass seeds in the soil were destroyed. Most of the burned upland has remained barren and functionally unavailable for wildlife, including nesting waterfowl. Next slide, please. This project will replant Field 13 with a blend of native grasses to provide upland nesting habitat for waterfowl and forbs to provide foraging habitat for pollinator species. This will restore habitat availability and improve habitat diversity within the upland unit. Once established, these uplands will be the largest continuous block of native grasses on Grizzly Island, totaling approximately 170 acres. The grantee will work with the United States Geological Survey to analyze past upland habitat enhancements on the wildlife area to evaluate vegetation and duck nesting response to various habitat treatments. The results of this analysis will guide both this and future upland enhancement efforts within the Grizzly Island Wildlife Area complex. Next slide, please. Pond 12 was converted to managed wetlands by installing water management infrastructure in the 1980s. The infrastructure needs repair, replacement, and/or redesign to function optimally. In addition to the aging infrastructure, the wildfire in 2019 destroyed most of the water control structures within Pond 12, functionally draining the pond. Wildlife area staff have since replaced a few critical structures to allow most areas to be flooded, but much more work is required to restore complete wetland management. Pond 12 is a regionally critical wetland area as it is the only waterfowl sanctuary on Grizzly Island and within the entire eastern half of Sassoon Marsh. Migratory and local waterfowl have come to depend on the safety that Pond 12 provides during the hunting season. Next slide, please. The project will provide a complete overhaul and simplification of all water management and distribution infrastructure throughout Pond 12. The infrastructure work in Pond 12 will allow wildlife area staff to flood individual units during the spring and summer waterfowl brooding season without impacting adjacent units, something that is not possible at this time. A small existing wetland in the southeast corner of Field 13 will also be enhanced, expanded, and specifically constructed to provide quality breeding habitat. These efforts will restore or enhance approximately 680 acres of managed wetlands. Next slide, please. Both the wetland and upland enhancement efforts will remove unneeded levees and linear ditches to combine management units. Research has shown that smaller upland fields experience higher predation rates of nesting birds. GPS tracking data has shown that raccoons and skunks, which are top waterfowl nest predators, use the ditches and levees as travel corridors, which increases their intrusion rate into upland nesting areas. By removing some of these artificial features in the project area, we will create a continuous block of native uplands within Field 13, which will be adjacent to summer flooded wetlands within Pond 12. This should result in increased nest success and recruitment of target waterfowl and other upland nesting bird species. Multiple Pond 12 wetland units will be combined, which will result in larger wetland areas, greater habitat diversity, and infrastructure that is easier to operate and maintain. Staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board approve this project as proposed. On the call today to answer any questions you may have is Robert Eddings, Regional Manager from the California Waterfowl Association. Thank you.
Great, thank you, James. I have received one letter of support for this project from James Cogswell, the coordinator of the Central Valley Joint Venture. And is there any board member questions or comments for staff on this project? All right, seeing none, any members of the public wishing to speak? Seeing none, I have no speaker cards. We'll move on to item number, thank you, James. Item number 37, the Mendigo Creek Fish Passage Restoration Project in San Mateo County. This is to consider a grant to the San Mateo Resource Conservation District for a cooperative project with the city and county of San Francisco, State Coastal Conservancy, and the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Don Crocker on our staff will present you the project. Don?
Thank you, John. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to the San Mateo Resource Conservation District for a cooperative project with the city and county of San Francisco, California State Coastal Conservancy, and Natural Resource Conservation Service to remediate a dam and fish ladder that blocked the passage of coho salmon and steelhead trout to 4.5 miles of upstream habitat on Mendigo Creek, 21 miles southeast of the city of Half Moon Bay in San Mateo County. Next slide, please. The San Gregorio watershed is the second largest watershed in coastal San Mateo County, and it drains an area of approximately 33,000 acres. Historically, the watershed supported robust runs of steelhead and coho salmon, but these species have experienced substantial declines over the past century. A big portion of this decline has been due to the loss of access to spawning habitat caused by fish passage barriers created by agricultural activities, timber harvesting, and residential development. There are still coho salmon in the watershed, and they belong to the Central California Coast Evolutionary Significant Unit, excuse me, and are listed as endangered under both the Federal and State Endangered Species Act. The watershed also supports a Central California Coast steelhead distinct population segment, which is also a listed species. Because of its historical potential, the Central California Coast Coho Recovery Plan identifies San Gregorio watershed as a focused population for protection, and the watershed's population of steelhead is listed as essential to recovery. The fish passage barrier that will be removed by this project is in Mendigo Creek, a major tributary of San Gregorio Creek, and is located approximately 1 mile southeast of the community of La Honda in the eastern, less developed portion of the San Gregorio watershed. Next slide, please. The project site is on the Log Cabin Ranch property, which is owned by the City and County of San Francisco Juvenile Probation Department and was until very recently used as a juvenile probation camp. As part of the camp's operation, a 6-foot-high weir and water supply intake were built. This included a dental-style fish ladder that was intended to provide fish passage over the weir. The fish ladder, however, proved to be prone to clogging, which causes the hydraulic drop over the dam to become a complete fish passage barrier. This is unfortunate because the area upstream of the water intake at Log Cabin Ranch is barrier-free and contain large areas with substrate suitable for spawning. The potential of this upstream habitat and its importance to San Gregorio watershed coho and steelhead recovery efforts led to the Mendigo Creek Dam and fish ladder being designated as a high priority barrier for remediation by the Integrated Watershed Restoration Program. The IWRP is a collaborative species recovery effort that works to meet the need for a coordinated regional process to improve fish and wildlife habitat. CDFW and National Marine Fisheries Service staff working with the program have identified the project site as the top priority within San Mateo County. Next slide, please. To fix this problem, the project will improve passage for anadromous fish and increase in-stream habitat complexity to benefit salmonids and other aquatic and riparian species. But it must do so in a manner that allows the landowner to continue utilizing their water right. The project will begin with the demolition of the existing concrete dam and fish ladder. Then approximately 310 linear feet of channel will be reconstructed in a way that mimics the natural stream characteristics for fish passage, sediment transport, and flood conveyance. Resting pools and large woody debris installations will then be added to enhance habitat complexity and capture sediment. Finally, the diversion intake will be moved approximately 95 feet upstream to a constructed pool where a new diversion pipe and fish screen will be installed. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the project site. On this diagram, water flows from the top left to the bottom right. The two resting pools are the light blue areas, with the upstream pool housing the new water intake. And if you look close enough, you can see where the large woody debris will be placed. Next slide, please. When this project is completed, there will be improved spawning habitat within the 310 linear feet of the project reach. More importantly, though, is now Coho and Steelhead will have access to 4.5 miles of potential spawning habitat upstream of the project site. The project will also increase habitat complexity, which will be a benefit for multiple life stages of anadromous fish species, and it will improve riparian habitat, which will benefit non-salmoniid sensitive species. Therefore, staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board approve this project as proposed. In the audience is Amy Kaiser from the San Mateo Resource Conservation District. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Any board member questions? Seeing none, any members of the public wishing to speak?
Yeah, John, Amy's hand is up.
Oops, I don't see it. Oh, Amy, go ahead.
Hi there, this is Amy Kaiser from the San Mateo Resource Conservation District. I just want to say thank you, Don, for putting this presentation together. I was going to make some comments, but you did a fantastic job describing it. So thank you to the board for considering. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Amy. All right, one more time for board member questions or comments. All right, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 38, the Keyhole Project in Santa Clara County. This is to consider a grant to Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District to acquire about 182 acres. Candace Morgan, our staff, will present you the project. Candace?
Thank you, John. The property is located south of State Route 9 and west of State Route 17 near the city of Los Gatos. The acquisition of this property will add to the surrounding 1,433 acre El Sereno Open Space Preserve. The property plays a key role in maintaining habitat connectivity, and it lies within a natural corridor path for mountain lions, deer, coyotes, bobcats, and a wide variety of other species. Next slide, please. The acquisition will further support the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District's project to link the open space lands on either side of State Route 17 via a new wildlife crossing for which WCB approved funding for as a development project at its February 2021 board meeting. Next slide, please. The property is part of the Santa Clara Valley National Community Conservation Plan, Habitat Conservation Plan, NCCP-HCP, which strategizes to acquire land for the benefit of covered species to ensure long-term protection of wildlife and rare and endangered species, including the bay checkered spot butterfly, Metcalf Canyon jewelflower, red-legged frog, and California tiger salamander. Next slide, please. The property is watershed land contributing to both the Los Gatos and Saratoga Creek watersheds, with sloping to steep terrain and creeks that run throughout the property. The property consists primarily of brush and scrubs, including California bay laurel, chamise, and coyote brush. There are some wooded areas on the property closest to the creeks, which support various salamander and frog species, and there is speculative residential development that could be allowed on the eastern parcel. Next slide, please. The Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District will own and manage the property similar to its adjacent protected parcel to the west, the El Sereno Open Space Preserve. Adding this property into its already preserved management will have minimal costs and no endowment is needed. Next slide, please. The district's Aquinas Trail already crosses the property, and it will continue to be open to the public after the acquisition. The portion of the Aquinas Trail that crosses the property is anticipated to be dedicated as part of the Bay Area Ridge Trail in late 2021. Next slide, please. The property was appraised and approved by DGS as having a fair market value of $1,450,000. The property owners have agreed to sell the property for a bargain sale price of $1,075,000, which is $375,000 less than the appraised fair market value. Staff recommends approval of this project as proposed. And in the audience to help answer any questions is Deborah Hurst, Program Manager for Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, and Alan Ishibashi, Senior Real Property Manager, also for the district.
Great, thank you, Candace.
Thanks, John.
Any board member questions, comments?
I had a question, John. It's Fran.
Yes, Fran.
Remember the planning grant that went out for this project to those guys. I just had a question that caught my attention. I always look up to see where the funding's coming from. Some is the GGRF and some is Prop 68 or Habitat Conservation Fund, but was listed on here and it caught my attention, general fund.
Right.
Who's general fund?
Yeah, it's the state general fund. And 2 years ago, there was a allocation to the Wildlife Conservation Board of general fund monies to work with the Open Space Trust and for opportunities associated with the San Jose Water Company lands. And so it was a direct allocation to us, it was an earmark of general fund money for that purpose. And so we've been working with the district, the open space district to identify projects to use that funding of high priority needs in that area.
Well, that's not typical. Not that I'm opposed to it. I was just curious. It might have been Senator Bell or something like that.
It was, yes, it was Senator
He
Bell.
loves wildlife corridors and he chaired transportation, so that would have been my guess. He's a good friend. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Yes. Any other questions? All right, any members from the public wishing to speak? All right, seeing no hands raised. We'll move on to item number 39, the San Joaquin River Parkway Western Reaches Access Planning Project in Fresno County. This is to consider an allocation for a grant to Fresno Building Healthy Communities for a cooperative project with the San Joaquin River Conservancy to complete a public access and planning project on the San Joaquin River within the San Joaquin River Parkway. That's under the jurisdiction and support of the San Joaquin River Conservancy. Erin Aquino Carhart of our staff will present you the project today. Erin.
Thank you, John. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a planning grant to the Fresno Building Healthy Communities for a cooperative project with the San Joaquin River Conservancy to plan and design public access for the western reaches of the San Joaquin River Parkway. This project is located in the northwest corner of the city of Fresno and within the San Joaquin River Parkway in Fresno County. As you can see from the project boundary in red, the project includes Camp Pashayan to the west and Melbourne Ecological Preserve to the east. Next slide, please. The project area currently has limited access points to the river and no connectivity to other sections of the parkway. And therefore, planning will be focused upon two areas, Camp Pashayan and the river trail design. This project will identify and re-envision Camp Pashayan as a new trailhead facility and river destination with park amenities and new trails and water connections eastward to the other sections of the parkway. The project would provide new opportunities for underserved communities in the area to access and enjoy the parkway. Next slide, please. The river trail will be a 4-mile trail from Camp Pashayan to Melbourne Overlook. And these new trails will connect Camp Pashayan to these listed areas, including Snyder Use Area, Riverside Trailhead Area, River Bottom Park, the Liddell property, and the Melbourne Use Areas. Next slide, please. And our project activities will include the development of 65% engineering designs, CEQA compliance tiering off of the existing master parkway plan, and EIR, community outreach, and the development of an access activation plan. Staff recommends that the board approve this project as proposed, and in the audience is Sandra Soledad Castro, the president and CEO of the Fresno Building Healthy Communities, and she's available for questions.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
All right, any board member comments or questions about this project for staff? All right, seeing none, hearing none. Any public comment? Sandra? I see Sandra Kildone Castro.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Celedon Castro. I'm with Fresno Building Healthy Communities. We are the project lead, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for your consideration and express how excited we are here at Fresno Building Healthy Communities, along with Urban Diversity Design and WRT, to engage with the community and really build on the momentum that has been building in our community around the San Joaquin River Parkway. The project that we're proposing will build on those historical efforts. For the last 5 years, the team has been working together around a number of public access issues, not just to the river, but also really thinking about how to create a connected network in the city and in the region, to enable more communities, diverse communities, to be able to access the river. And we really believe that engaging with community through a participatory design and planning process is one of the best approaches to for long-term sustainability. So with that, I just wanted to take a brief moment to thank you for considering this project and just share the enthusiasm that we have for this project here in the Valley. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sandra. Next speaker is John Shelton.
Hi, yeah, I'm the executive officer of the San Joaquin River Conservancy, and I wanted to let John's board know that his staff has been very important in getting multiple projects of ours up and going. And this Western Reaches activation is very, very important for our overall goal. I did also want to mention for any of those that have been around for quite a while that even though Aaron kind of stumbled over the pronunciation, it's Camp Pashan, named after Chip Pashan, a local politician who was very important in our local area a long time ago. One of the first politicians I met when I was a teenager. But Chip Pashan helped get the Boy Scouts of America to be able to purchase this land. And we inherited it through a couple of different exchanges and got that property. But it's a very important project, and I thank you for all your consideration.
Thank you, John. All right, any other comments? Any other public comments? Justin Morgan. I think you're on mute. There you go.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity and for your consideration. I'm just here to echo the enthusiasm for this project in the community. I live here in Fresno and work with a variety of community organizations, and everybody I know that is aware of this project is very excited about it. And everybody that doesn't know about it, when they hear about it, gets excited. This is a really important piece of connecting the urban area to nature and getting people outside. And there's just a tremendous benefit to a project like this. So I just wanted to state my enthusiasm and thank the Wildlife Conservation Board for their consideration. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
John.
Yes.
Oops, Diane here. I just wanted to say that it's nice to see a project on the agenda that's actually building a trail that's going to have public access and be accessible to people in nearby disadvantaged communities as well. I know that the agenda said the project noted it's not located within a disadvantaged community, but it'll be accessible to nearby communities that are.
Right.
And I know a lot of other projects we can't always, for other practical reasons, make public access available, but it's good to see this on the agenda.
Great, thank you, Diane. Fran, you had a comment?
Just can't resist as a Fresno State alum, watching this progress move forward on the San Joaquin River Parkway is something that really didn't see coming, and it's so importantly needed as growth has exploded sort of north of Shaw Avenue and Bullard and now out to Herndon. And this is in the area of a broader disadvantaged community in Fresno, but gorgeous property. It's sort of the gateway to the Yosemite as you go up Highway 99 there, and Millerton Lake is just upstream. So this will be well used for biking and hiking and is very publicly accessible. And there's an explosion of growth all over this area. So I look forward to going to see the completion of this project in the years to come.
Great.
Didn't see it coming in the 60s.
And just a quick comment and follow up on John comment earlier. WCB is a member of the San Joaquin River Conservancy, and it's been the Conservancy Board's desire and really vocal desire over the last couple of years to really start standing up public access projects along the river to allow the public to get out and use the river.
Yep.
And so they've really taken an interest there. And John Shelton's work with the board and with the public down in that area, you're gonna start seeing some projects really materialize down there and really start opening up for public access. So it's a great thing to be able to be part of that. So is there any other board member questions or comments? All right. Seeing John Shelton said field trips anytime any board member wants to come down and see the river. So thank you, John. All right, well, let's move on to item number 40. And I just want to let the board know we're going to take item 40 and 41 together. Jason Yee on our staff is going to present these two projects. And we're doing this together because they're identified as two projects on the agenda. And for reasons because there's two different landowners, so we have to consider them really two different projects, but they're within the same general vicinity. They're with the same organizations, same staffs working on them. So in the essence of time and in the virtual world, Jason will be presenting them both, and will be referencing them both during his presentation. So Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Sean, and good afternoon. These WCB proposed grants will support the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority with the total acquisition of 400 acres of property known as the Chino Hills 80 and Chino Hills 320 properties, which are under two different private ownerships. The properties are located approximately 30 miles southeast of Los Angeles, just outside the Chino Hills city limits in San Bernardino County. Primary access to the area is provided by Riverside 91 Freeway, located approximately 2 miles south of the properties, along with the Corona 71 Freeway, lying just 1 mile to the east. The properties are located in an area known as Chino Hills, a landscape of mostly mountainous, rugged, steep terrain with areas of open natural landscape. The properties are almost completely surrounded by the Chino Hills State Park. The park is a significant part of the area, containing approximately 14,000 acres of rolling, grassy hills and valleys dotted with stands of oaks and sycamores. The park is a critical link in the Puente Chino Hills biological corridor, which stretches nearly 31 miles from the Whittier Hills to the Santa Ana Mountains. Next slide, please. The properties are identified as a high priority for protection in the CDFW Puente Chino Hills Tonner Conceptual Area Protection Plan. The plan has identified private lands adjacent to the park that, if acquired, would expand the area's existing preserve system of 18,000 acres, increase wildlife connectivity, and permanently protect occupied habitat for threatened and endangered species. The Chino Hills 80 property is comprised of one undeveloped rectangular shaped parcel with topography that is characterized by rolling and steeply sloping hillside. The property is mostly comprised of grasslands, coastal sage scrub, coastal live oak woodland, and mullifit scrub. The property is currently zoned as agriculture ranch, which allows for a single family residence, equestrian facilities, agricultural uses, cattle grazing, and passive recreational use. Historically, the property has been used for recreation and at one time may have been used for cattle grazing. Next slide, please. The Chino Hills 320 property consists of 3 contiguous undeveloped parcels with topography characterized as gently sloping to steep mountainous terrain, supporting habitat that includes oak and walnut woodlands, chaparral, coastal sage scrub, cactus scrub, and grasslands. The property is currently zoned as agriculture ranch, which allows for single-family residences, equestrian facilities, agricultural uses, cattle grazing, and passive recreational use. Historically, the property may have been used for recreation and at one time may have been used for cattle grazing. These acquisitions will permanently protect the properties from development and will directly support CDFW's Tonner Cap by aiding in the expansion of the 31-mile Puente Chino Hills biological corridor. The properties will also provide a crucial connection between the park and the Prado wetlands, located just 1 mile east. Wildlife movement from this area has been well documented by the U.S. Geological Survey. Fencing to guide wildlife under the State 71 is in place. Next slide, please. Primary species likely to benefit from the protection of the properties include the leaf spou's vireo, coastal California gnatcatcher, southwest willow flycatcher, yellow warbler, coastal cactus wren, grasshopper sparrow, loggerhead shrike, white-tailed kite, northern harrier, and deer. Next slide, please. MRCA will own and operate the properties as part of its extensive land holdings in San Bernardino, Los Angeles, and Ventura counties. MRCA is a joint powers authority and owns thousands of acres of open space across the region and has many years of experience in managing similar properties. The acquisition of the properties will provide an opportunity for MRCA to protect and preserve the open space and natural resource values and potentially afford recreational opportunities to the public, such as hiking, biking, and wildlife viewing. Management endowments for both properties will be established at the close of escrow by the current landowners. DGS has approved the fair market values of the properties. Staff recommends that the board approve these projects as proposed. In the audience are Melanie Schlotterbeck, representing Hills for Everyone, and Derek Austinson, representing the Conservation Fund. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
Great, thank you, Jason. And for this project, I did receive some letters of support that I'd like to get on the record. I did receive a letter of support from Senator Josh Newman of the 29th District, Mr. Dan Silver, Executive Director of the Endangered Habitats League, Eric Johnson, Chair of the Puente Chino Hills Task Force of the Sierra Club, and Claire Schlotterblack, Executive Director of Hills for Everyone. So is there any board member comments or questions on this project? Or these two projects?
One comment, I'm very familiar with the MRCA. They'll do a good job in holding this for you and are great for public outreach and activities. But I also wanted to say, I think this is a great addition to the governor's proposed 30-30 plan that the Resources Agency is working on, additional land set aside in perpetuity for public access as well as habitat purposes. So thank you.
I agree. Great. Any other board member comments or questions? None. Public comment. I know Paul Edelman is on. He's the MRCA and Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy's resource manager. So Paul, you want to say a few words?
Hello, members. Hello, staff. The MRCA really appreciates this opportunity to help add to the whole core habitat area of Chino Hills State Park and to work with the nonprofits putting this together. This core habitat at Chino Hills State Park is really one of the great big open space areas that's near a lot of people in Southern California. We look forward to the opportunity to grow it. There's more to come. And I just want to say in general that these WCB meetings are the greatest show on earth in terms of saving land every month or every 3 months. They're fantastic. So thank you, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Any other comments, public comments? All right, seeing none. Any last board member comments or questions?
What if somebody submits information that we're not?
All right, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 42 in the agenda. This is the Santa Cruz Island Reserve Infrastructure Project. This is to consider the allocation of a grant to the University of California at Santa Barbara. James Croft on our staff will present this project to you all. James.
Thank you, John. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to the University of California, Santa Barbara for a cooperative project with the Nature Conservancy, complete facility enhancements at the Santa Cruz Island Reserve located on Santa Cruz Island within the Channel Islands in Santa Barbara County. Next slide, please. The project is located at the Santa Cruz Island Reserve Field Station on Santa Cruz Island, roughly 25 miles off the coast of Southern California. The field station is located in the center of the island, within the central valley that runs east to west. Access to the island is limited, and all users and staff must stay overnight in the reserve facilities. The field station is composed of various buildings arranged across an approximate 20-acre site. The reserve's field station offers year-round accommodations for researchers and field classes. Structures include a director's residence, staff residence, garage, workshop, restrooms, a 25-visitor dormitory, 6 private rooms, a kitchen, admin office, library, lab building, and a classroom building. Utility services for the structures include a local well for water, solar arrays for electric power and hot water, and propane tanks for cooking. Next slide, please. Access to the island is limited, and all users must stay overnight in the reserve facilities. The reserve's field station offers year-round accommodations for visiting researchers and field classes. All users must bring their own food, toiletries, and bedding, as there are no commercial facilities on the island. Reserve programming attracts approximately 1,000 annual unique users to engage in research and educational activities, totaling over 5,000 annual user days. The reserve has been and continues to be a prime location for long-term, intensive, and collaborative research on important environmental and resource management problems that brings researchers from all over the globe. In recent years, there has been an enormous expansion in long-term field-based research to determine the effects of climate change on the distribution of species and the functioning of the island's ecosystems. Next slide, please. The project will construct a wastewater treatment system, which is needed to treat and dispose of wastewater generated from the reserve facilities. In order to support future facility needs, reduce environmental impacts, and decrease costs, the new wastewater treatment system will support both current and future staff housing facilities. The project will install 2 new septic tanks and a connected leach field system for wastewater disposal. Next slide, please. 2 new ADA compliant staff residences will be constructed to replace an existing mobile unit. The new staff residences will be constructed using prefabricated shipping containers. These units are cost efficient, rodent resistant, and durable. The residential units will be constructed on the mainland and then delivered to and installed on the island. The exterior design and coloring of the residences will be selected to blend into the landscape. Each of the 2 new housing units will contain 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, a living room, and kitchen facilities to support long-term occupation by employees. The 2 residences will vary in size. Unit 1 is approximately 1,200 square feet and includes a laundry facility and office space, while Unit 2 is about 960 square feet. Electrical power for the new residences will be provided by a photovoltaic system. The system will include PV panels, racks, inverters, and batteries for storage. High efficiency and long life lithium-ion batteries will store the solar energy produced from this array. The solar array will be a ground-mounted single system supporting both units. A propane system will be installed for cooking, heating, and backup hot water needs. These facility enhancements will support an increased presence and availability of staff and will directly benefit the research and training activities of the reserve. New staff housing will support development of a docent program for public engagement and outreach. Next slide, please. Staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board approve this project as proposed. On the call today to answer any questions you may have is Dr. Jay Retty, Director of the UC Santa Barbara Santa Cruz Island Reserve. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Any board member questions? All right, seeing none. Any member of the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none. Great. We'll move on to item number 43, the Watson property acquisition in Orange County. This is to consider an allocation of a grant to Rivers and Lands Conservancy, and also the acceptance and the sub-grant of a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Habitat Conservation Planning Grant. Candace Marg on our staff will present you the project. Candace.
Thanks again, John. The property is located in the community of Silverado in unincorporated Orange County. The property is adjacent to the prior conserved 306-acre Saddle Creek property and is contiguous to more than 80,000 acres of Cleveland National Forest land, comprising of a diverse range of wildlife, habitat, and public trails. Acquisition of this property would secure a large portion of a wildlife corridor associated with the southern Orange County from Trabuco Canyon to the Cleveland National Forest. Corridors have been designated to ensure linkages among the following large habitat areas: the Cleveland National Forest, Arroyo Trabuco, O'Neill National Park, Whiting Ranch Wilderness Regional Park, and Santiago Creek. Next slide, please. Large mammals using the habitat within these corridors include mule deer, mountain lions, bobcats, coyotes, gray foxes, badgers, raccoons, and skunks. Next slide, please. The property is within the Foothill Trabuco specific plan area, which comprises about 6,500 acres of undeveloped land that serves as a buffer between suburban development and the Cleveland National Forest. Additionally, approximately 50 to 75% of the subject property is within the approved Central Coastal Habitat Conservation Plan, Natural Communities Conservation Plan, HCP, and CCP. Next slide, please. The property is of irregular shape and consists of terrain that is rolling to steep. The property owners have an unapproved tentative subdivision map that proposes 49 single-family lots on the property. Prior to entering into a purchase contract, the property was intended to be developed by the property owners as a residential housing tract. By conserving this property, a variety of critical habitats and species will be permanently protected, including the California gnatcatcher, cactus wren, intermediate Mariposa lily, and other sensitive and federal listed species. Next slide, please. The property consists of high quality oak woodland, cactus scrub, and coastal sage scrub, which have been classified as critical habitat and wildlife resources by numerous state and federal agencies. Next slide, please. A creek stretches through much of the property from the north flowing south. This natural unchanneled drainage supports a dense canopy of native coast live oaks and old growth woodlands. Next slide, please. The property will be owned and managed by Rivers and Lands Conservancy. Along with this property, the Conservancy also manages the contiguous Saddle property. The property owner will provide a $1,500 non-wasting endowment to the Conservancy to manage the property's sensitive resources. The property's endowment will be complemented by an approximate $450,000 endowment for the adjacent Saddle Creek property. Next slide, please. The property was appraised and approved by DGS as having a fair market value of $4,916,000. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is a funding partner in this acquisition and is contributing $3,500,000 towards the purchase price. Staff recommends approval of this project as proposed. And in the audience to help answer any questions is Derek Austinson, Project Manager with the Conservation Fund, Maria Lim, Mitigation and Land Conservation Coordinator with Rivers and Lands Conservancy, and Becky Miller, Grant Manager with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Great, thank you, Candace.
Thanks,
I
Sean.
did receive one letter of support for the record, Mr. Dan Silver, Executive Director of the Endangered Habitats League. So is there any board member comments or questions on this project for staff? Any members of the public wishing to speak? Seeing no hands raised. Great, thank you. So we'll move on to item number 44, State Route 94 Wildlife Habitat Corridor Planning Project in San Diego County. This is to consider an allocation for a grant to River Partners with a cooperative project with BLM, Bureau of Land Management, and the department. Mr. Scott McFarland on our staff will present the project. Scott.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, board. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to River Partners for a cooperative project with the Bureau of Land Management to design multiple infrastructure improvements identified in the 2016 Wildlife Infrastructure Plan for State Route 94 that will enable large and small animal movement between the San Diego National Wildlife Refuge, Lawrence and Barbara Daly Preserve, Otay Mountain Ecological Reserve, McGinty Mountain Ecological Reserve, Hollenbeck Canyon Wildlife Area, and Rancho Humboldt Ecological Reserve along State Route 94 between the communities of Rancho San Diego on the west and Dolzura on the east in San Diego County. Improved connectivity on conserved lands on both sides of the highway is fundamental to the integrity of the preserve network. In total, the conserved lands of this management unit include over 80,000 acres and span a key elevational gradient that facilitates wildlife adaptation in response to climate change. Intact conserved landscapes such as these are critical to the genetic interchange within plant and animal populations, allowing dispersal and recolonization of new areas, enabling populations to shift in response to environmental and land use changes, and are essential for climate change resilience and adaptation. Next slide, please. In 2016, landowners and agency partners reviewed scientific literature, wildlife road mortality data, roadway and tracking studies, baseline studies, and management plans for the surrounding conserved lands and on-the-ground field reconnaissance reports to produce a wildlife infrastructure plan. This project will closely follow the results of this plan, completing the planning, design, and permitting for 59 recommended wildlife infrastructure improvements. Next slide, please. These planning efforts are based on consideration of connecting needs for 40 species. This linkage is particularly high priority for large mammals, including deer and mountain lions, and multiple species of amphibians, which currently experience high road mortality. For these rare species and a wide variety of common wildlife, project improvements will also improve climate change adaptation and resiliency for providing a high-quality corridor connecting wildlife to newly suitable habitat. Additionally, this portion of State Route 94 has been identified as a top priority for remediation by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's 2020 Wildlife Movement Barriers Priorities List. Next slide, please. The results of this project will lead to improved habitat integrity, connectivity, and ecosystem function between conserved lands for a community of species rather than any single target species by enhancing wildlife movement corridors as measured by reduced road mortality and increased use of wildlife crossing structures. Specific actions include restoration of habitat along existing migration corridors, increasing functionality of existing crossings, replacing poorly functioning crossings where needed, installing fences, gates, cattle guards, and jump outs to keep animals off the roadway and direct them to the crossings. Next slide, please. Together, once implemented, the corridor improvements will increase habitat integrity and ecosystem function for the largest expanse of remaining conserved coastal habitat in Southern California. In conclusion, the staff recommends approval of the project as proposed, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have, and in intends to answer any of your questions too is Julie Rentner, the president of River Partners, and Emma Hofstede, the Southern California ecologist with River Partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I did receive a letter of support on this project from Mr. Dan Silver, Executive Director of the Endangered Habitats League. Is there any board member comments or questions? All right, seeing none. Any members of the public wishing to comment? Seeing none. All right, that concludes our presentation calendar. Right now we're at item number 45, which is the executive session item. So if board members are ready, we'll go into executive session. And I don't anticipate that we'll be in closed session very long. So what will happen is we're asking the members of the public to remain on.
John?
Yes?
Just interrupt. Could we vote on the proposed items? Clear that, then go to closed session and come back and report on closed session?
Yes. Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
right,
Would that be okay with the board? I mean, we could keep
Yeah,
all
that
60
sounds,
people.
that sounds like a good plan to me. Let's vote on them while we're here.
Okay.
Yes, agreed.
I don't want to make the audience guess when we might come back.
No, we could just tease for another half an hour.
Yeah, a couple days.
Okay. So hearing that, what I'll do is I'll read the motion and then I'll ask for somebody to move and second that motion. And then we'll take a roll call vote. So staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board adopt the written findings as appropriate and approve individual projects numbered 31 through 44, inclusive of all recommended funding sources and amounts as identified in the Wildlife Conservation Board final meeting agenda dated May 20, 2021. Authorize staff to enter into appropriate agreements necessary to accomplish these projects and authorize staff and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to proceed substantially as planned. So with that, Member Boakday?
Do you need a motion first?
Oh, I do need a motion. I'm sorry. Yeah.
John,
please.
you're rattled, man. You're off your game.
It's okay.
Oh, I want to get back to real face to face.
I'll move
is good.
approval.
I'll
of
second
the
that.
item, consistent with Director Donnelly's.
All right, so the motion was moved by Board Member Pavley and seconded by Colborn. And so roll call vote. So we have Member Boakday,
Yes.
Member Bonham,
Yes.
Member Colborn,
Yes.
Member Creasman,
Yes.
Board Member Gillian,
Yes.
Board Member Pavley,
Yes.
Board Member Silva.
Yes.
Great. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, board members. And before we go into closed session, I just want to say thank you to all the public members that joined us today. Without your support and help and guidance, we couldn't do the work that we do either. So thank you, everyone, and you're welcome to stay on, hang out if you so wish, so desire, and we'll come back and report out of closed session. For now, board members, I'll ask that you go into closed session and you'll be using the Teams meeting invite that you received yesterday from Celeste Reisner. We'll see you shortly.
Okay.
While we're migrating back over, Senator, I would just say, I saw the news with Wallace and the contribution. That's great. And hopefully it gets matched. You're on mute.
Remember our helicopter ride with Joe Edmonston, probably
Mhm.
5, 7 years ago. I know it's when I was in office. And you
Mhm.
said the most important thing, and I quoted a lot still. Oh, I get it, because you can only get it from an aerial view.
Mhm.
All the land on both sides of the 101, we said, we're in the middle of the hourglass.
Yep.
Or something like that, and that's it. Yeah, we have to match it within a few months so we can start construction, because you can't go out to bid unless you have all the money. You can't say, well,
Yep.
we think we might raise it later.
Right.
So yeah, so that'll be our biggest challenge, but having that grant out there should hopefully attract things, or if some of the governor's budget money stays
Right.
in those categories. I notice especially that one on the wildlife and fish passages.
Mhm. Yep.
That could be helpful. We'll still go out to the private sector too, but it's I know Wallace Annenberg wanted to be a partner with the state in doing this, so that was
Yeah.
always part of the interesting part of the discussion. But that's,
Yep.
most people I talked to, they said that's the biggest environmental grant that anyone remembers in cash. People donate property,
Right.
but
Yeah, it's a significant commitment. It's exciting.
All right, so I think everybody's back, and I just want to let the public know that we're back from the closed session item regarding Albert Thomas Pollock and others versus the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and others in Riverside County. Case number RIC 2003634. And I'll ask Colin Mills, our staff counsel, to report out of closed session. Colin?
Yes, I just want to report out that the board gave direction to WCB's counsel and the Office of the Attorney General with respect to the litigation that John just mentioned. And I would also on the record like to note that member Bonham did not participate in the vote with relation to direction to staff.
Great, thank you, Colin. Right, is there any last comments from board members? Any last minute questions, comments?
Thank you for all your hard work and all the hard work of the staff.
Thank you,
Good meeting.
Diane.
No doubt. These meetings give us hope for California. So thanks for
Absolutely.
bringing it into our lives a couple times a year.
Great. All right. Thank you.
John, we
Joe,
adjourn.
please-
Thanks, everyone.
Please adjourn.
Yep, we're adjourned.
Bye.
All right.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Bye, everyone.
bye.
Bye.